What's going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be ranking System of a Down's discography from my least favorite up to my favorite album. I did a similar video like this with Deftones where I arranged the albums into a tier system, but for this one I'm going to do it a little different and just do a list. Similar to Deftones, System of a Down are one of my all-time favorite bands. Been a fan of them, since I was 12, 13 years old. So I've been listening to them for a long time. And also, much like Deftones, I think they're a band that doesn't have a bad album. They have a relatively small discography, and each of their albums is fantastic and absolutely, functions as a great album. There's no real slump or bad entry into their discography. However, I did think it would be fun to arrange the albums from my personal least favorite to my favorite. So, let's get going. Taking the number 5 spot is the final entry into System's discography, Hypnotize. Overall, I think this functions well as the band's kind of swan song or final album, and also the compositions of Hypnotize are very good. It's very expansive. It features a lot of the theatrics that System is known for, a couple more experimental tracks, and pretty dense instrumentation and good use of overdubbing. One thing I will say though is the drums feel a little less punchy on Hypnotize than they do on Mesmerize. Overall, I prefer the sound on Mesmerize more than the sound on Hypnotize. Hypnotize stuff seems a little muffled in the background, but that's a pretty minor nitpick for an otherwise great album. As far as the tracks go, I think Attack functions as a great opener. Really helps set the tone for the album. But some other tracks, such as Dreaming and a couple other tracks on the album, just don't have the same weight as some of the System classics. They start to kind of have a similar sound where there's the melodic, harmonized chorus or verse with Serge and Darren singing, and then either a driving verse or big chorus. I don't know. It kind of becomes, there's definitely a formula that System does, and after a while, it gets a little old. Maybe because I listened to this album last. Songs like Kill Rock and Roll and She's Like Heroin are fun, but they kind of have this dumb, tenacious D quality that when you put against tracks like Soldier's Side or Hypnotize or Tentative, it kind of doesn't work, I feel like some of the more juvenile, jokey songs fit better on the earlier albums, but as System evolves and becomes the mature version of itself, some of these tracks I feel like could have, been left on the cutting room floor. That being said, Tentative was one of my favorite System of a Down tracks. I like the fast verse with the dissonant guitar chord and then the break into the big chorus where it goes to almost like a halftime feel. I love the vocal harmonization, and I also like the message, the very, no one gonna save us now. It's good, man. I used to have that on fucking repeat riding the bus home. Good times. Also, I like how they tie in the outro, Soldier Side, with the intro of Mesmerize, as these albums are kind of meant to be like a double album, but just one portion was released first and then another portion was released later. So I think it's cool that they, put a callback to the first album. That's some good galaxy brain shit that System did. Vicinity of Obscenity and U-Fig are honestly two of my now favorite tracks from this album. I didn't really like these when I was first listening to the album. I preferred, Hypnotize, Lonely Day, and Tentative, but I really, really like Vicinity of Obscenity. It seemed like all of the core System elements, but turned to 11, even more ridiculous vocals, proggy instrumentation, even mathcore kind of Dillinger Escape Plan elements. And I just love the vibe changes in the track too, where it goes to that kind of jazzy section. It's like they took their, Queen and Frank Zappa on meth sound and just really refined it. And honestly, I think it's the best track on the album now. When I went through and re-listened to the album, that's the one that I gravitated to the most. Also, there's some good singer-songwriter moments on it, like I said, with Lonely Day. So overall, I would say that there's some great tracks, but the smaller production and some of the less memorable songs makes this album seem So overall, I feel like this is a good album with just some less than memorable tracks and somewhat lackluster production when compared to Mesmerize. Basically, I think you could have taken some of the standout tracks like Lonely Day, Mesmerize, I think you could have taken some of the standout tracks like Lonely Day, Tentative, Hypnotize, and Vicinity of Obscenity and just put them on Mesmerize. And sometimes I feel like Hypnotize is some of the B-sides and maybe ideas that didn't quite make it to Mesmerize. So that's why it's coming in 5th. Fourth place is going to be the self-titled album, which functions as a great album and a good first entry into System's discography. When it came out, right around the turn of the millennium, there's a lot of kind of generic nu metal that was just being shoved out by the music industry. And System, along with some other bands from their era, were responsible for kind of breaking up that sound and bringing something wholly unique that people hadn't heard before. One thing this album does feature is extremely dry production. This was a kind of Rick Rubin style at the time, super dry, no reverb, and it definitely works on this album. Songs like Sugar and the classics like Sweet Pea benefit from that just stripped down, dry production. When compared to the newer albums though, the stripped down production sounds a little small. A lot of goofy vocals on this album. It's a really theatrical album, kind of a drugged up fever dream of a metal album. However, the track list on this album is a little bit long, and some of the songs sound a little samey and have very short run times. And personally, I'd rather those songs just be done away with. I'd rather have a smaller album with all really good ideas and a big album with a bunch of kind of half-baked ones. But still, some of those songs are fun. I enjoy Sweet Pea as the album's opener. Serge immediately showing his lyrical prowess and kind of crazy outsider persona on this track. Sugar, always a classic. However, some songs like Cubert and D-Devil, though I enjoyed them when I was younger, I think a lot of fans did, they haven't aged super well for me. They seem kind of a little too goofy and, lack a little bit of substance, honestly. I like the polka Eastern influence on songs like Suggestions. Also, Spiders is a good example of the more serious sound that appears in later System albums. You've got these interesting vocal melodies from Serge and almost a Tool type vibe that feels still very genuine to System. It doesn't just feel like a ripoff. War is another classic. The "We Will Fight the Heathens" chorus. It's a good driving metal chorus. Definitely like the kind of speed metal adjacent sound that they had on this album. So overall, I'd say this is a great breakout album and probably one of the better 1999 turn of the millennium nu metal albums. They had some unique lyrics here, some theatrical moments, and a good blend of serious themes and just outlandish, crazy, songs about party and rock star bullshit. So definitely a roller coaster ride of an album. However, I do feel like some of the filler songs just fall kind of flat at times, and as I listen through it as an older person, I can kind of do without them. And also, the really kind of flat production leaves something to be desired when you know what System turns into. When you start to hear the stuff that Darren's coming up with on the later albums, and when he really kind of expands into, double tracking and crazy proggy stuff, Led Zeppelin-ish territory, just having Darren only do 2 tracks of basic rhythm guitar, it's good, but when you know what he's capable of, it's But this is, again, the first album, so that's why I'm giving it the 4th spot. Number 3 is going to be Steal This Album. It's kind of a return to the ridiculous and druggy vibes of the first album, but it seems more nuanced. The tracking sounds fuller, as this is following the bigger sounding Toxicity, and you hear more use of double tracking. And this album has some seriously heavy sections, but the whole thing is kind of imbued with this Frank Zappa vibe. Crazy songs about former cops being undercover in a pizza restaurant. It's kind of ludicrous, but it works completely. I feel like some of the goofier songs on this track, like Chicken Stew and IEAIAIO, I think, I really enjoyed when I was younger, and I still enjoy. It's comical, but it's also just addictive and fun to listen to. And, there's definitely a time when I like to put on those goofier tracks. I like the spoken word bits on tracks like Boom, and the combination of, first album craziness with the more refined instrumentals. Mr. Jack is one of my favorite System tracks of all time. I like how it kind of slinks through the verse, building intrigue in this story about Mr. Jack, and then it breaks into this massive chorus where they sing a dissonant interval that, rubs on the ears, super weird, and I think it's just a really smart choice that System did to include that. It sounds really weird and, really helps kind of flesh out the vibe of the song. I really enjoyed Darren's more intricate playing on songs like Fadeaways and his acoustic guitar work on Roulette. It almost has this Led Zeppelin-y vibe that's really cool and good to see, Darren doing on these later albums. There are also some more There's some very enjoyable deep cuts on this album that I feel like, don't get a lot of love in the mainstream. Songs like Ego Brain, Highway Song. Highway Song almost doesn't sound like a System song. It has a really interesting vibe in the chorus or in the verse when there's that arpeggiated plucked line. It almost sounds like a different band. Songs like Streamline are, almost like aerials. And those are some of the reasons this album hits the third spot. It might be the best blend of goofy System and serious System. Other albums start to move more in the serious direction, which I do like, but I feel like this album, the goofy side still feels genuine. It doesn't feel kind of phoned in and dumb like I feel like it kind of does on Hypnotize. I didn't like the goofy stuff there. One thing I will say though, Steal This Album's track list is pretty big. It's 16 songs, and some of them just don't really do anything for me. Songs like Bubbles, New Guns, 36, it's, I get that they're fun to listen to, but I could have just done without them, If this album was 10 tracks and, they could have easily just trimmed this album down to 10 tracks, keep some of the goofy ones, a bunch of the serious ones, and some of the more like oddity type tracks, and had an amazing album. But overall, this is one of my favorite System albums. Also, the fact that this album got leaked and System essentially just said, you know what, fuck it, we're going to put it out. I think it's cool that they were able to handle that bump in the road and recover from it and release a great album. Taking the number 2 spot is Toxicity, an album that many people would argue is System's best album, and for good reason. This album features better production than the self-titled. The compositions are more in-depth. The band shows more range of themes and sounds on this album. And there's a couple just, infectious riffs and hooks that are just classic System of a Down. Definitely an album for a first-time fan, someone who's never listened to System before. This is the album that I would generally recommend. This is going to give you a good taste of everything and, has that somewhat commercial, accessible vibe that even non-metal fans can, listen to songs like Aerials and be like, wow, this is incredible. Whereas if you showed them something off the first album, they might be like, that's fucking stupid. I like the guitar tones on this album a lot more. I like Darren's super in-your-face and tight playing. The whole album just sounds a little cleaner, a little more, focused and less drugged out than the first album. I love the kind of weird start to the album's opener, Prison Song. It shows that, System still has their weird vibe. And, he comes right in with that political sentiment about mass incarceration and mandatory minimums. On this album, I feel like the political message is very focused. Whereas on the first album, there's some generic, anti-war hoopla that I think for younger music listeners are important to hear. Like, rather than reading some article about why the prison system is messed up, for me as a 13-year-old, you package it up into a well-composed metal song and now that's an issue that's on my radar because it was given to me in a format that I like to consume. That's where I think bands like System, in society as a whole, actually have like an important place and do some important stuff. Very cool. And on Toxicity, that message it's stylish, it's presented well, and it's presented extremely, it's very genuine. It doesn't feel like, System at no point feels like a band that's just like, we made a song about why the government's bad. It's so woven into who they are, but it's also, it's not, what they base their whole identity on. It's interesting. It's similar to Rage Against the Machine. Anyway, I really enjoy the track Needles. It's got a nice bridge to it. I really enjoy the track Needles too. I like the bridge where Darren and Serge harmonize. This album too, you see Darren kind of getting his vocals situated and figuring out, how he wants to sound. And I think Darren and Serge's voice complement each other very well. And this is the album where we start to see that getting fleshed out. I like the theatrical vocals on Dear Dance. I like the use of overdubbing on this album, both guitar and vocal overdubbing. That wasn't really present on the first album due to it being super stripped back. But here, System kind of gets more loose in the studio and starts layering and stacking ideas and making these kind of big Queen-style songs. And that's where I think System really starts to hit their stride. And this is kind of the album where they discover it. There are some, again, samey kind of sounding tracks like Jet Pilot, X, and Bounce. I like the, Korn-like section of Bounce, but some of these tracks feel a little unfinished. Again, I feel like the track list is a little bloated on this album. Highlights on this album, of course, Aerials, Chop Suey, Atwa, Toxicity, just incredible songs that all have these just anthemic choruses and iconic earwormy riffs. Man, I love the haunting vocal passages and big choruses in these songs. When getting into this band, Toxicity, Aerials, and Atois were some of the songs that reached out and grabbed me. I've come around more to the heavier kind of first album tracks. There's a lot of fans that like the first album a bunch, but honestly, when I first heard System, I didn't like the first album. I was a big Toxicity guy because I like these melodic songs that I could sing in my head, and they sound powerful. So yeah, this is overall an insane album. It continues the frantic energy of the first album, but blends in some more mature songwriting and truly iconic tracks that are going to go down in history as some of the most famous rock and metal tracks ever made. Better verses on this album combined with better production just make it seem like a more complete artistic statement, very stylish and focused. There's a wide range of lyrics and vibes on this album, serious, depressing, to just downright funny. A couple tracks in there like Bounce talking about groupies and drugs. It's the System of a Down, menagerie of all the different crazy shit. That's what I like about System, Same with Deftones. I like bands that they don't just have one sound. They can take their sound and do all these different sounds and vibes and topics while still keeping it authentically theirs. That's something I love about System and about, any good band. Darren really stepped up his guitar work on this album, incorporating some, amazing clean passages and iconic riffs. And overall, this is just a phenomenal metal album. So yeah, number 2, Toxicity. And the number 1 spot, drum roll, Mesmerize. I thought a lot about making this one number 1 or number 2. It was kind of a toss-up. But after listening through the albums again, Mesmerized was my obvious choice for the number 1. It's generally tied with Toxicity as, one of the band's strongest albums amongst fans and, critics alike. But I think this one, at least, at the time of me making this video, it's taken the top spot. The production on Mesmerize is phenomenal. It's dry, but it sounds huge, and it's super balanced. It might be one of the best produced System records. Also, you just have these hits and classics like BYOB and Violent Pornography that are, ridiculous, bombastic, crazy, but also just super good metal songs and really highlight the kind of unique System sound. This is, I feel like, a great realization of that speed metal, thrash, ridiculous punk sound mixed in with the Zappa and Queen influences. Outlandish lyrics and political message are again combined super well on this album. And also, I think the reason I like it so much is Darren is more present on this album on singing and, really expanding on singing and writing, crazy riffs, pushing himself to kind of, get to that next level of riff writing and singing. I love what he does on songs like Lost in Hollywood. Also, great use of dynamics. Songs like BYOB are just in your face, angry, fast, loud, and then other songs are more, laid back and chill, like Lost in Hollywood. I think Soldier Side sets the stage well. It's a harmonically interesting track, and it showcases Darren's compositional skills. It's a very strong album opener. Revenja and Cigaro show that early album sound, but also combined with the more composed and serious side of System. Radio Video incorporates that Eastern and polka kind of influence that you hear, but what's great about it is System works these elements in so authentically that it doesn't feel like a gimmick. It truly is an integral part of their sound because, those guys are of Armenian descent and they grew up listening to music that had that sound to it. So the fact that they bring that into their sounds so well is super cool, and it really sets them apart. There's no other band that really does that. Question, man, has an almost proggy quality to it. Great drumming and bass work. Probably one of my favorite System songs. In certain parts, it sounds like a modern prog metal track. I love the ending track. Big chorus and biting lyrics about the entertainment industry. This album overall has, some great poignant lyrics by Serge. Also, this album has a pretty cut down track list. There's no real half-baked, half-finished ideas on this album, and I think that's why when I was just listening through the albums, I enjoyed this one the most because, it was like, let's get to the point. Let's get to the best ideas. I like picking individual songs off some of their other albums, but as far as just putting it on and listening through the whole thing as a complete idea, the 16-track albums, I don't like them as much. I feel like I have to wade through some filler to get to the stuff I want. But Mesmerized isn't like that. The whole thing plays through as an amazing, complete idea. We have great vocal performances and great guitar work on these songs, and they're super to the point. Overall, it feels like a condensed and focused album. And there you have it, my list of the System of a Down albums rated from least amazing to most amazing. Hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to jump in the comments with your list, or, tell me what you agree with, tell me what you didn't agree with, tell me if I'm full of shit, doesn't matter. But yeah, thanks for watching the video, and stay tuned to my channel for more audio and music related content. Until next time, peace.